Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know what you're doing for your grad project, but mine, I'm not doing too good. I still have no idea what I'm doing. I know, and plus with interdisciplinary studies, it's like I don't know where I can start. I just have to combine a bunch of different fields together with some sort of perspective on a certain topic, I guess. And I don't know where I'm going to start. And I'm close to the deadline here, so I need to figure out what I'm doing. So, yeah, and I am, yes, as you can tell, I am struggling a little bit. So, I don't know what I should do. Hold up. I think I see something.
Sir Justin Trudeau speaking right now after the U.S. left Canada with 25% tariffs. Let's listen.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend.
That's it. I know what I'm doing now, and I know exactly how I'm going to do it. Hello, my name is Thomas Sheldon, and welcome to Bridging Sustainability and Trade, an interdisciplinary approach to environmental and economic resilience in Canada. This is a discussion and an inquiry into how Canada can become a stronger, more sustainable, and a more self-reliant country. But before we dive into that, let me ask you a question. What is even interdisciplinary? It's a question I get a lot. From the beginning of my time at Capilano University, I get why people are confused. It's not like saying I study biology or I'm in political science. Interdisciplinary is a bit confusing, but that's also what makes it very powerful. At its core, interdisciplinary studies is about breaking down and analyzing problems instead of approaching a problem through just one lens. Say economics or environmental science, for example. We ask, what if we can combine these lenses and use these tools and insights of multiple disciplines to tackle the most complex layered challenges of our time? Take climate change, for example. Atmospheric science gives us the data, but it doesn't explain why our emissions keep rising. For that, we need economics to look at the incentives. We need political science to understand the barriers to climate policy. And we need indigenous knowledge because there are ways of living with the land that are deeply sustainable but are often ignored. And lastly, we need sociology because cultural values shape our collective action. And that's exactly what interdisciplinary thinking looks like. And it's exactly the kind of thinking that Canada needs right now. You see, Canada and the world are facing major issues with their relations with the United States. And this is nothing new, though. President Donald Trump slapped Canada with tariffs on steel and aluminum back in 2018. Yeah, that was a moment. Suddenly, Canada faced a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% on aluminum going into the US, our biggest trade partner. The move was framed as a national security issue, which, to be honest, felt like a slap to the face. It blindsided Canadian industries. Politicians scrambled, economics warned of the rippling effects, and everyday Canadians, especially those working in manufacturing, mining, and energy, started asking, if trading with the US can turn hostile this fast, shouldn't we be able to rely more on ourselves? And honestly, it seems like common sense. We're a massive country with rich resources, strong institutions, and a shared economic interest. So why aren't we trading more within Canada? Well, here's the plot twist. It turns out trading within Canada is kind of a nightmare. In fact, in many cases, it's easier to trade with another country than it is to trade between two Canadian provinces. Which I'm pretty much saying, you can ship a product to the US with fewer headaches than trying to sell it to someone one province over. So that's what today's topic's about. Two big questions. One, why is Canada so bad at trading with itself? And two, how can we fix it in a way that supports the environment, respects Indigenous knowledge, and helps us become the Canada we say we are? Section 1. The internal mess. Let's start at home. Canada is more efficient at trading internationally than it is internally. Think about it. A country that shares infrastructure, language, and currency still makes it absurdly hard to trade across its own borders. Since 1989, we've signed free trade agreements with more than 40 countries. but trying to get Alberta beef into Ontario or BC wine into Nova Scotia, and you'll hit a bureaucratic wall. Why? Well, it's 3 words: interprovincial trade barriers. These are regulatory, legal, and administrative roadblocks that make it harder for goods, services, and even workers to move between provinces. Some of these interprovincial trade barriers are based on geography. Sure, Canada's a big country, but most of them are man-made. Let me give you a few examples. Trucking rules are varied from province to province. Different weight limits, licensing systems, and safety inspections. Meat inspection standards don't align, meaning a product processed in one province might not be accepted in another. And in some provinces, it's technically illegal to order a bottle of wine from a winery in another province. It's like every province built its own little castle. And instead of building bridges, we made paperwork. Section 2. The cost of doing nothing. These barriers aren't just annoying, they're expensive. A study by Alvarez, Cisnar, and Toom found that liberalizing trade within Canada could increase our GDP by up to 4%, or about $92 billion per year. Now, I want you to think about that just for a second, that amount of money and what you could do with that amount of money. You could build schools, you could build hospitals, you can invest, you could build almost anything with that amount of money. This is a game changer. This is a massive opportunity with the cost of doing nothing. And here's something even more eye-opening. According to Ryan Kohlberg, Canada ranks among the worst countries in the OECD when it comes to internal trade restrictions. Yeah, we're not just a terrible trader, we're the global bottom tier. So we're pretty much the worst. And all of this is happening while our biggest trading partner, the US, keeps showing us it can't always be trusted. Tariffs on steel and aluminum aren't just economic tools, they're political leverage. They're signals that the global trade system is fragile. And we already could see with all the tariffs coming in that all the stocks and the economy has changed. And that over-reliance on these internal partners can backfire fast. So if we can't count on our neighbors and we can't count on ourselves, who exactly can we trade with? Section 3. Why is this still a problem? Well, as an interdisciplinary student, this is where political science comes in. You see, Canada is a federation. That means provinces have a lot of autonomy. And while that structure has strengths, local governance, regional representation, it also creates fragmentation. Each province tends to protect its own turf, even if that hurts the country overall. The Constitution technically supports free trade between provinces. Section 121 literally says goods shall be admitted free into each of the other provinces. But in practice, well, that's up to the courts. You see, the courts have often sided with the provincial jurisdiction. That's allowed protectionist policies to linger for decades. And on top of all that, there's a status quo problem. Some industries benefit from these barriers. Regulators don't like giving up control. Politicians avoid big reforms that are messy, complicated, and slow. So the bottom line, reform is really hard, and nobody wants to attempt it. Section 4. The attempt at provincial trade. That doesn't mean we haven't tried trading. In 1995, Canada signed the Agreement on Internal Trade, the AIT, and it was supposed to reduce barriers and standardize regulations across provinces, but it relied on cooperation, not enforcement. There were too many loopholes, too many ways for provinces to stall, opt out, or water things down. For over 2 decades, not much has changed. So in 2017, we got an upgrade. The Canadian Free Trade Agreement, also known as the CFTA. This one took a negative list approach, meaning everything is covered unless specifically excluded. On paper, it looked way stronger than the original trade agreement, but in reality, provinces still found ways to sidestep the rules. The Regulatory Reconciliation and Cooperation Table, try saying that 5 times fast by the way, was created to harmonize standards across industries, but the progress has been slow. Really slow. According to a Deloitte report, 6 provinces actually increased their trade barriers after the CFTA was signed. I almost forgot that. So, if the nation-level agreements aren't cutting it, what is actually working? Section 5, the Western Model. Now, I think it's time for me to introduce you to the New West Partnership Trade Agreement, also known as the NWPTA. This is the regional deal between BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And guess what? It works. It allows professional certifications to be recognized across provinces. It aligns product standards. It simplifies business licensing. In short, it treats the West like one economic zone. And it's resulted in some of the lowest trade barriers in the country. So what's the lesson here? Local leadership can actually work. We don't have to wait for Ottawa. But we do need to scale these successes nationally. Section 6. The interdisciplinary fix smarter, not just freer. But here's where we need to bring in the interdisciplinary lens. Fixing the interprovincial trade isn't just about economics. It's about how we trade and whether that trade makes us more sustainable. So yes, we need to strengthen the CFTA. We need enforcement. We need accountability. And we need real incentives for provinces to play ball. But we do need sustainability at its core. So what does that mean? It means to prioritize ethical, transparent supply chains. This goes beyond just knowing where a product comes from. It's about ensuring that every stage of production, from raw materials to final delivery, aligns also with our environmental goals and social values. It means using fewer exploitive labor practices, avoiding industries that cause irreversible ecological harm, and ensuring transparency so consumers and communities can make informed decisions. For example, food systems that rely on industrial monocultures or carbon-heavy transportation could be replaced by regionally sourced, fair trade alternatives that empower small producers and Indigenous-led enterprises when supply chains are ethical and traceable. They build trust, resilience, and long-term viability into our economy. And the federal government is already moving in that direction. Through Global Affairs Canada, Canada promotes responsible business conduct, supporting companies to meet international environmental and human rights standards, including respecting Indigenous sovereignty in trade-related development. Section 7. Indigenous knowledge is not an option, it's a necessity. Let's talk about land, let's talk about rights, and let's talk about wisdom. Indigenous peoples have lived in what we call Canada for a millennia. Their relationship to land is not extractive, it's relational. It's not about ownership, it's about stewardship. Through thousands of years of lived experience, Indigenous communities have developed knowledge systems deeply rooted in observation, adaptation, reciprocity, and respect for natural cycle. It's not about cultural, it's about ecological expertise, generational science. It's a blueprint for sustainability, and yet in our current economic trade and regulatory systems, Indigenous voices are still too often excluded. Their lands are encroached upon, their data is taken without consent, their communities are promised consolation, but rarely given collaboration. Pipelines are pushed through unceded territories. Fishing quotas are decided without listening to the people who sustainably harvested those waters for generations. Forests are logged in the name of short-term profits, ignoring the long-term ecological and cultural consequences. That's not just unethical, it's unwise. If we're serious about creating a future that is environmentally sustainable, economically resilient, and socially just, then we need to start with Indigenous knowledge, not treat it like it's an afterthought, not as a consolation checkbox, but a foundational framework for how we build, grow, and govern. So what does this mean in practice? It means co-developing policy. It means not drafting legislation in Ottawa and sending it down the chain, but sitting at the table together from the beginning. It means respecting Indigenous governance systems, both hereditary and elected, and building laws that reflect shared priorities, not imposed assumptions. It means honoring data sovereignty. Indigenous communities have long been subjects of research, rarely the owners of it. That needs to change. Data collected on Indigenous lands or from Indigenous knowledge must remain in Indigenous hands. This includes environmental monitoring, land use data, and cultural knowledge. The principle is simple: nothing about us without us. It also means strengthening Indigenous political representation, not as a token gesture, but as a transformative one. Indigenous elected officials, whether in Parliament or provincial legislatures, bring more than votes. They bring Indigenous perspectives, community experiences, and cultural teachings into spaces historically designed to exclude them. Their work is not only advocacy, it's diplomacy between worlds, the colonial structures of Canada and the sovereign Indigenous nations within it. They are not just voices of opposition, they are builders of alternative futures. Their roles are complex, as Carey and Coop found. Indigenous representatives often navigate tensions between party loyalty, helping their communities and nationhood, and yet they persist, working across party lines, creating Indigenous assemblies, and pushing for policy that reflects both ecological reality and cultural truth. In short, if we want fair trade in Canada, trade that doesn't deepen inequality or undermine sovereignty, then we must involve Indigenous people as co-governors of economic frameworks, not afterthoughts in an impact assessment. That includes supporting Indigenous-led trade agreements and cross-border partnerships, especially in shared territories with the U.S., ensuring Indigenous participation in regulatory review boards and resource revenue sharing, and recognizing Indigenous elected officials not as a symbolic figure, but as sovereign actors with legitimate authority to shape the future of trade, environment, and governance. And it means sharing the economic benefits of trade. If resource projects, whether it's mining, forestry, or clean energy, operate on Indigenous territories, then Indigenous communities must be equal economic partners, not just recipients of impact benefit agreements, but co-owners, decision makers, and long-term beneficiaries. That's what economic reconciliation actually looks like. And it means recognizing that sustainability isn't a sector. It's a way of life, one that many Indigenous communities already live every day. Land-based knowledge systems prioritize balance over extraction, cycle over linear growth, and care over control. These aren't just poetic values, they're survival strategies proven over centuries that can guide all of us in an age of climate disruption and economic uncertainty. In short, Indigenous knowledge is not a nice to have, it's a necessity. And it's one of the greatest untapped strengths this country has. When we center Indigenous rights, land ownership, and knowledge systems in our policies, including how we trade, how we build, and how we govern, we don't just repair past harms, we build a smarter, more resilient, and a better Canada for everyone to live in. Conclusion: let's stop sucking at being Canada. So Canada kind of sucks at being Canada. Let's be honest, we pride ourselves on being a country that's clean, green, inclusive, and united. But our systems often tell a different story. Our interprovincial trade is bogged down by barriers and bureaucracy. Our economy still rewards extraction over restoration. And too often, Indigenous voices, the very people with the longest, most sustainable relationship to this land, are sidelined in the decisions that affect their communities, territories, and futures. But here's the thing. We don't have to keep sucking. We actually have tools, the knowledge, and the policy frameworks to do better. We can reform interprovincial trade, not just make it freer, but smarter. We can streamline regulations, reduce duplication, cut waste, and unlock billions in untapped economic value. But more importantly, we can design a system for the world we live in now, not the one we inherited. That means weaving sustainability into the fabric of our supply chains. It means investing in clean energy, circular economies, and ethical production. It means taking Indigenous knowledge seriously, not as a box to check, but as a foundation for how we trade, govern, and live. It means recognizing that trade isn't just fast or profitable, it's just regenerative and resilient. Because the goal isn't just to trade more, the goal is to trade better. So stop thinking like a loose federation of provinces and start acting like a country. Let's stop using outdated systems as excuses. Let's start building a future that reflects our values and actually works. Let's stop sucking at being Canada. Let's lead the world by being the best versions of ourselves, for the economy, for the planet, and for people who've always called this place home. Let's make that the new standard. I'm Thomas Sheldon, and this is my grad project. Thanks for watching.